these techniques may apply to everybody, but there are certain techniques that are more effective for certain kinds of people or certain kinds of athletes?
Well, definitely it's harder to teach younger kids more technical techniques because they're not developed yet cognitively. So, but there are definitely some things that they can do to still perform at their best, especially if you're a gymnast. And you know that gymnasts are young and there's lots of things that they need to memorize. And you can just use these sports psychology techniques to help them learn how to focus more by teaching them easier ways to remember things.
How soon does it have an impact? Once, let's say, for example, you start training with an athlete today, how soon will they start seeing a difference in how they perform?
Well, it depends on what they're working on. Usually, athletes would see a result just by being aware. Their awareness of, yes, I was a little tense on my previous performance, and maybe I need to just like relax a little bit, and maybe it will make a difference. So definitely they can see instant results. But if they want to be more consistent, like in the long run, they have to practice the techniques like all the time and play with it with different situations. Because there are times when it's easier for you to remember to do the techniques, and there are times when the pressure is high and when you need it the most, that's when you start to go back to what you're used to.
Mm-hmm. How are the different ways that people react to pressure, especially in the athletic field?
Well, sometimes when they're in a pressure situation, they tend to tense up, and when they tense up, they can't gracefully execute the skills that is needed for their sport. And also, cognitively in their head, there's like, it's so noisy that they think about what happened in the past, they beat themselves up, they sometimes have a lot of negative self-talk and self-doubt, and that gets into the negativity of their confidence too. They lose their confidence.
Okay, what are some of the techniques that you teach individual athletes versus what you teach athletes in team sports? What are the differences?
For individual athletes, I can narrow it down and really focus on what they really need. And for teams, we talk more about team cohesion because that's very important in order for everyone to have a positive working environment, and also work hand in hand with the relationships with our teammates and their coach.
Are there particular cultures, for example, that respond better to sports psychology? For example, I mean, what I'm trying to say is Asians, for example, are usually more, are less confrontational. They don't really handle embarrassment well. Is that a factor?
Yes, it's a very cultural. That's why it's important for Filipino athletes to have a sports psychology consultant who at least knows something about the culture. Most Westerners, like in the U.S., they're very open to sports psychology because they've seen all these big athletes succeed through sports psychology, like the golfers. Most of them use sports psychology, and like Michael Jordan used sports psychology techniques, and they see that their idols and they succeed in sports psychology, they try it as well. But I think if Filipinos start to know more about sports psychology and be aware of how it affects them, they'll be open to trying these things out too.
A couple of days ago, you gave a workshop on sports psychology at UP. What did you teach there?
Well, I taught them awareness of focus. How do they know when they're focused and when they're not focused? What are some of the distractions that's present in their sports, and how to deal with those distractions? That way they can focus, because I strongly believe that focus is the key to mental toughness, and everyone wants to be mentally tough, but how do you really measure somebody who's mentally tough? But everyone, all the athletes that are mentally tough have one thing in common. It's their ability to focus on the task at hand, despite of the distractions and despite of the pressure. So a mentally tough athlete can go to a stadium where there's like hundreds of people watching, and people that he cares about like are watching, but he won't feel the pressure, because when he steps on the court or when he is performing in his sport, all his attention is on the task at hand, what he is supposed to do, and he's not going to lose his focus until he finishes and achieves what he's there to do.
What about athletes who are injured? I've heard a lot about muscle memory technique and visualizing their performances in the past. How does that work?
Definitely, that's really important for injured athletes to do some mental techniques because physically they're not capable. A really great example is Marilyn King. She was injured and she wanted to make the Olympics as a big athlete. So what she did was she did imagery of just like visualizing what she does when she's physically practicing, because face it, mental practice is better than zero practice. And if you're injured and you're not able to practice for a year, you're going to be losing a lot as an athlete. But if you do visualization, you're able to activate some of the things, the cognitive connections between your body and your mind. So these are things that you won't be able to practice physically if you're injured. And also you can do an imagery of healing. So for example, you're injured in your knee. That's like a common injury in like basketball or other sports that like in athletics. They can do healing imagery to help them heal faster. They can see themselves moving and visualize it in their head, and it makes recovery faster, especially with proper physical therapy.
So how does the process work from visualizing something? What is the impact that it has? What is the effect that it has on your body?
Because whenever we think about an action, there's always like a stimulus and a response. And for example, if you're shooting a basket in basketball, you are watching like the court. You see the basket, and then you just like make a shot, and you know that it's going to go in because you've already calculated that. So what imagery does is it just makes the connection between the presenting stimulus, which is like how far the net is, to the response, how far you're going to hit that. And if you think about that all the time, when it's going to be more automatic, like the response that you're going to do. What happens is if you're mentally prepared, if you do an imagery or visualization the night before, everything will just like come automatic to you. So you don't have to respond just when you see it. It's more like it's already a decision that you've already made, that if you're presented this is the response you do.
Now, looking at how to spread sports psychology in the Philippines, what are some of the problems that you face? Because it is, after all, relatively new.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's hard for some of the athletes to see the importance of sports psychology because they think that, oh, there's nothing wrong with my brain. You know, why would I need a psychologist? I'm an athlete. I'm strong and capable. But sometimes you just ask an athlete and approach them and say, how much of your performance is mental and how much of it is physical? And then they would actually answer some number, whether it's 50-50 or 80-20, and they're not really doing anything for the mental side. So basically, awareness is the key. If most athletes in the Philippines would realize that, yeah, definitely there's like a mental side to sports and I want to work on that, then maybe they'll be open to learning about sports psychology.
All right. Now, how would you introduce that to an athlete to develop a winning attitude? How long does it take to feel impervious, to feel insulated from the stimuli around you?
Well, it's really good to see success. Like athletes, they want to see instant gratification. It's either they win or they don't. So if they set goals, if you tell them to try this technique and they realize that it makes a difference for their performance, then they're going to be more open to trying different things.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sheryll.
Thank you.
Sheryll Casuga, a sports psychologist. Japan orders an